Hi guys, and welcome back to Pass and Move. And for today's episode in the Premier League series, we've got Liverpool here in the Tactics and Team Guide, the 10th team on our list so far. We're obviously doing it alphabetically, so if if your team is one of these teams here, we'll get around to it. But for today, Liverpool, and we've already covered everyone above them here as well. So obviously Liverpool, a very interesting team to take over. I think this season they have Champions League football as well. After a couple of seasons, I suppose, of poor form, they've jumped back to 4th. And the aim is obviously to try and win the title with them. But in terms of the board themselves, they just want you to qualify for Champions League football once more, and they need you to reach the quarterfinals of the Champions League itself. You actually enter in the best place playoff, so you do have to be very careful of a two-legged game. There's always a bit of a worry about how those go, but you should win and get into the group stages and then obviously advance from there. FA Cup is to reach the final, and the League Cup or Carabao Cup is not important for the board. So those are your expectations, but in terms of where the season preview thinks you'll finish, it's actually in 5th place. So they don't expect you to get Champions League football. They think the two Manchester clubs, and Chelsea and Arsenal, are going to be the ones who get Champions League football, and Tottenham finish just below you, and of course there's always the ever-present Everton. But bearing in mind the squad you've got, I think they're good enough to challenge for the title, if not Champions League football. We'll go through it just one by one, but in terms of what we aim to do today, it really is just in the title. We're going to try and set you up tactically, hopefully for obviously future success. And at the same time, the team guide is telling you who to sell, who you should keep, areas you might want to invest in, and just how to bring out the best out of your squad. And obviously we can cover some small little things here. So one of the first things I like to do is actually go into the coaching staff and see whose judgment of ability I can trust. Potential is important as well, but a judgment of ability is more important just because I need to judge the actual squad for how they are right now. In the future, we'll keep that in mind, the potential of each player, but the main thing is their ability. So it looks like Peter Krawietz here is going to be the one who we're going to lean on for advice. Another thing that I like to do before the match, before anything really gets going, is actually go to the under-23s, include the under-18s as well, and see if there's anyone who's over age who shouldn't be in this block of players. So I think I moved about 2 of them up to the first team squad already, so just keep that in mind. And I obviously also sort them out in terms of ability to try and see if there's anyone within the the youth teams who are ready for actually first team football. So it looks like Ben Woodburn's really close. He's a championship player. Hopefully you send him out on season on loan for 1 year, and then he'll be back hopefully ready for Premier League action. And ready for first team action, that is, of course. So in terms of the squad itself, you've got a very decent one, like I mentioned. I like to have a squad of 22 players, and just in terms of numbers, you seem to be okay with 28 here, so you're quite overstocked in truth. But whether these players are good enough or not for actual first team action, we'll see that in just a moment's time. But obviously, I like to have a squad of 22 players. I always like to mention in every episode is because I like a first exi or a starting exi of 11 players, obviously, who are leading, star or world-class players, and then a backup 11 of young potential players who can become leading, star and world-class players, and who are obviously ready for the Premier League as well. So I like to have that type of balance. In my squad, 2 players per position seems to do the job. Unless you suffer some incredible amount of injuries, that should get you through a season, even with Champions League football. But obviously it depends on how everyone likes to do their own thing. It's just the type of balance that I like to have. I feel like it works best. The youngsters keep the first teamers on their toes, never really knowing fully, feeling completely secure about their position, and that way and the youngsters are obviously always fighting for minutes, and they won't necessarily complain because they're young. You probably have them on rotational option, if not a rotational contract, if not youth prospect or I think it's called hot prospect actually, or youngster even contract, so they won't expect too much game time, and that's why it has like a nice little balance to the team. Obviously, the next thing to do is sort out your team in terms of ability. So we can assume this here is your best 11 players. So just having a look at Liverpool's squad here, just from the outside, not even going through each player one by one, it looks like they're best set for 4-2-3-1 formation. I can't imagine this working any other way. The problem really that you have with Liverpool squad is actually they don't have a nice balance between two players for each position, and we'll discuss that further in just a moment's time. But just having a look here, it looks like Liverpool are set up much like a lot of the other top teams in the Premier League, or even around the world for that matter. A 4-2-3-1 seems to be the formation that makes the most sense. You could possibly squeeze in for 4-3-3. That means not playing with attacking midfielders though. But at the moment, 4-2-3-1 seems to make the most sense. So bearing in mind that we're going to be playing with that formation, we can now actually go through each position and see where we can, get rid of numbers, for example, or any of that sort of business. So goalkeepers, we only really need 2. We've got 4 of them here, and you could imagine that we wouldn't need Bogdan, for example, just a championship player, injured as well, and doesn't seem to be improving anytime soon. He's 29 years of age, so he's not going to improve any better. The problem is whether you'll actually be able to get rid of him before the summer transfer window ends. He's 4 weeks to 2 months out, so that's quite a while. But if it's 4 weeks, you're okay to go in terms of selling him. But 2 months, it's unlikely you'll have enough time to actually move him on. Worth 5.25 million and 24k wages, a Hungarian international. You'd be better off having that money for yourself in truth, so he'd be one of the players to sell. Danny Ward is someone who looks to have a tiny bit of potential. He could possibly become he has potential to be a good Premier League goalkeeper, but the truth is we obviously want leading goalkeepers, but you never know, he might exceed this. If you ask me, send him out on loan. 24 years of age, it's unlikely that I actually improve too much. But always trust your youngsters. Give him just 1 season's time on loan to a championship side, and who knows, maybe he'll improve. If not, by next season, just sell him off. No loss there. You can obviously decide to sell him as well. 6.5 million, you get some decent money from him. Welsh international as well. So it's really up to you, but if you're asking me for my advice, it'd be to just send him out on loan for a season's time, see how he comes back. So that kind of leaves you with these 2 goalkeepers who are good enough for the Premier League. Both are considered good players, but Simon Mignolet just about edges in terms of ability. But obviously Loris Karius, it's very tempting to have him as a first teamer because he has a tiny bit more potential. He could possibly become a leading goalkeeper, and that's exactly what you need. But I guess kind of unfortunately, Simon's a tiny bit ahead of him in terms of potential. He's in his prime years, as it says here in the coach summary. He's important to the dressing room, and his only weakness really is that he's one-footed, which really isn't that much of a weakness. He's 29 years of age, so like we mentioned, a prime player, and you also have the I guess kind of an issue that he is expecting first team football. So I think my advice is that you do have a good set of players. You could definitely start Karius as your first choice goalkeeper if you wanted. But if you ask me, just keep Simon right now for your first team goalkeeper, which is what we've put here. And keep Karius as your backup, but actually play him in every cup competition. I always do this whenever I finally have a nice balance between my goalkeepers, is that I keep my main goalkeeper for the Premier League, and the rest cup competitions I give it to my backup goalkeeper, and that's plenty of game time, especially with all the competitions you're in. Champions League, FA Cup, Carabao Cup, you can expect your backup goalkeeper to just about get 20 games plus possibly if he plays all the cup competitions, and you guys obviously do well there. So that's plenty of games, enough for him to develop, and if he does become a leading goalkeeper and improve more than Simon, then he can actually overtake him as a first team, and he can demote Simon to the backup role, I suppose. So at least your goalkeeper department seems to be decent. I don't think necessarily you should sell anyone off and bring in anyone or any of that sort of business. If you wanted to be completely ruthless, you could sell Simon and bring in an actual leading goalkeeper and have Karius as the backup until then, but it's really up to you. In the game, he's not as error prone as he is in real life. I mean, I'm just basing this on stats and his report, but there doesn't seem to be any issues there, at least. So, in terms of right back, you've got Klein, Flanagan, and Trent Alexander-Arnold. Klein, there's a bit of an issue with him. He actually has a damaged spine, so he's out for 5 to 6 months. So the wise thing might be to bring in someone on loan up until just the winter transfer window, and just have them covering Klein just to make up numbers. He doesn't have to be a top player until Klein comes back, so you can show some faith, I suppose. John Flanagan though, decent player. I think Klein, we can actually have a quick look in terms of his ability. He's a leading Premier League player, and leading fullbacks are very rare in the game. So let's hope that Peter's judgment is actually right. But if so, that means you've got a top right back, nothing to worry about in the first team department. But in terms of the backup, maybe some concern. John Flanagan, decent player. He's currently close to potential. And the likelihood is, if he ever does improve, he'll only ever become a good player for potential. You also have the issue that he's susceptible to injuries. My judgment would be that you're better off with a better youngster. And unfortunately, Trent is not quite ready. So what you could do is actually send Trent out on loan to a championship club. Hopefully he'll come back next season as a Premier League player. And that way you have your backup youngster. And at the same time, that means you wouldn't necessarily have to get rid of John Flanagan. You can rely on John Flanagan just for the season, but really I would say give him as little game time as possible with Klein out. So move Trent out on loan, keep John Flanagan and Nathaniel Klein, and just bring in a loan player who's ready for the Premier League, of course, and just for 6 months time until Klein is back. In terms of centre-backs, Klavan, Lovren, Gomez and Matip. So thankfully you've got the numbers. The issue is, are they good enough? So Matip is apparently a leading centre-back for the Premier League, so you've at least got that area sorted out. The problem is that Lovren, as well as Klavan, are both good players for the Premier League, so that's definitely an area that you should possibly invest in. I think it said Lovren's susceptible to injuries as well, which is a big concern too. We've got Joe Gomez. Thankfully he's ready for the Premier League and he has plenty of potential, so he can be one of your backup youngsters. That leaves you with really just Lovren and Klavan, who shouldn't necessarily be first teamers. You're going to want a first team partner to Matip, so get in a top centre back, sell Lovren and bring in a top centre back, and sell Klavan as well and bring in a youngster with potential. Estonian international, 119 caps, 11.5 million. You get decent money from him, and you can definitely bring in a youngster with potential. Lovren himself is worth 23.5 million and 100k wages, so if you do sell him and move him on, you could definitely bring in a top centre back with that type of money, and the likelihood is that you've got some money from the board for this season too. So that's my advice. Obviously you could possibly survive with Lovren partnering Matip, but that's just the kind of balance I like to have. Left backs though, Andrew Robertson and Moreno are your left backs. So again, once more, you've got the numbers. The question is, do you have the quality? In terms of Robertson, he's a good player for most Premier League sides. He's close to potential, so he could possibly become a leading left back. We also have to accept the reality that Liverpool have just bought him in, and so the Scottish international, you won't be able to actually move him on even if you wanted to. But if you ask me, incredible attributes. I love a fullback who has a top crossing, and he's one of those. And he has potential to become a leading left back, so he's actually going to be our first choice left back. Moreno's a very decent backup. He has a hint more of potential as well. Less likely that he'll improve more than Robertson in truth. So, you know, when it comes to left back position, Robertson is edging him a bit in terms of ability as well. So it looks like you've got a nice little balance. It would be better if you had the leading player and then a backup youngster, but, you know, sometimes this does come the case where you've got two youngsters who are good enough for your first team. And you might damage their chances if you bring in a top left back. Also, like I mentioned, fullbacks are tough to find, top fullbacks, so it might not be wise, for example, to move on Moreno and then you won't find a leading left back that's actually buyable. You know, it's very rare that you'll be able to buy someone, for example, like Alaba from Bayern Munich. He's not going to be interested in moving to your team, and even if he was, you'd have to pay 80 million or something for him. It's ridiculous money that you don't have to spend, and you need to actually invest elsewhere. So in terms of central midfielders, you've got a fair few. If we can consider Emre Can, Jorginho, Wijnaldum, I think it is actually, Henderson, Milner, and of course Marko Grujic. So in terms of that, you've got 5 central midfielders. So the hope is that actually Marko is not good enough for the Premier League. But apparently he is. You can consider him one of the backup youngsters with plenty of potential, I suppose. Your first choice, though, it looks like it will be Emre Can and Jordan Henderson, just based on ability. They're both the first choice central midfielders, just like it says here as well. So Peter thinks he's a leading Premier League player, and Emre Can, the same goes for him. In fact, actually, just to be fair, Milner apparently is also considered a leading player. That's a bit of a surprise for me. Some of the Liverpool squad players actually are overpowered, I feel, in the Football Manager 2018. And I don't know whether it's Peter's fault, like in terms of his ability, or whether it's the game itself. I think it's the game, because Peter's been at Liverpool for about 2 years' time now, so he should know the players and he should be able to judge their ability correctly. But if you ask me my prediction, I think throughout the season you'll actually see James Milner's ability drop. But for now, he seems to be really good for the squad, more than decent backup in truth. The problem is he's expecting first team, he's not expecting first team football, but he is on first team football wages, 140k, so it's a big concern. If you ask me, the moment his ability drops, or the moment you feel like he doesn't have good form, he's not playing well for your team, doesn't suit the tactics, or so on and so forth, you should definitely move him on. 22.5 million, 31 years of age. You're not going to be able to sell him at any other better time, to be honest. The problem is his wages though, and the likelihood is no one's really going to want to buy him at his age and 140k wages, so it's a huge problem. But you know, as a backup, he's a really good option. So we can consider Henderson, Milner and Emre Can are definite central midfielders for your team. Jorginho here though, he's also a leading Premier League player, so you have a lot of depth and strength in your midfield, in your central midfield. You know, you could probably get away with playing a 4-1-2-1-2 if it wasn't for the fact that you've got top wingers as well. So that's the problem with this Liverpool squad. You actually might have a bit too much depth and not too much balance to your squad. The likelihood is someone's going to complain about game time at this time. But at least your 4 numbers are sorted. Unfortunately, there's no real room for Marco, so try and move him on loan to a Premier League club. I'm sure someone would love to have him, and hopefully by next season you'll have that kind of area sorted out. Maybe Milner's ability would drop a little bit, and in that sense that means you could play Marco in his position instead and sell off Milner next season. But central midfield, plenty of depth, does not need any sort of area to invest in. You've also got a number of players here. Let's have a quick look at Marco actually. Okay, he's a Serbian international already, by the way. But in terms of you know, your front 4, I suppose, attacking midfielder, right winger, left winger and a striker, you've got plenty of numbers here. Too many, to be honest. You've got 10 here, and the truth is you just need 8. So if we can consider, you know, that we want to play the best 4 together, in that sense it actually is Salah, Lallana, Firmino and Coutinho. So, you know, it might not necessarily be a position sort of game necessarily. We're just trying to squeeze in the best players together. So unfortunately, Sadio Mane, for example, misses out, even though he's a top player. He's also expecting key player football, basically. He's a top player for the league, to be honest, leading. But unfortunately for him, Salah just about edges him in terms of ability, and he suits our tactic a hint more. So we're going to be going with Salah, of course, who you just bought. So really try and keep Mane as much as possible, but the truth is, unless you actually somehow juggle both players, the likelihood is Mane is going to complain about game time and you will have to move him on. But yeah, so if we consider these are our front 4, Salah, Lallana, you know, it's Salah leading, of course. Lallana is a star player, I think, as well, which is another thing that I think, no, he's leading, but even leading I feel like is a bit over the top, overpowered sort of thing. Firmino is a leading, which is fair enough, and Coutinho is probably leading as well, which is also fair enough. Okay, he's a star player, so you definitely want to bring out the best out of him as well, which is what we're trying to do. So we squeeze in these 4 here. The problem is, of course, Firmino is supposed to be one of the, you know, 2 players who play in attacking midfield, but we're actually squeezing him up into the striker position, and that leaves us a little bit short in the attacking position. So we have to just keep that in mind. But at least we get rid of these 4. That's us, our first 11 sorted out at least. But now in terms of backup players, we've got Mane as a winger, and he can play on either wing, either flank in truth. He cuts inside from both wings, so if you ask me, he's more suited to the inside forward position than he is as a winger, because wingers, you don't want them cutting inside. So maybe he can play as a backup to Coutinho. That would make more sense once we show you the actual tactic. Markovic though, he's a decent player for Premier League size. He can become good and possibly surpass his ability and maybe become leading. The problem is he's got injury susceptibility, no real space for him in the squad. But, you know, he's just a little bit unfortunate, I suppose. Another Serbian international. You've also got Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, who's just a winger. You could possibly retrain him for the inside forward position on the left. He can do that role if he actually becomes a natural, but the likelihood his ability drops a little bit. The problem is he's expecting first team football. He's a good player for Premier League sides and has leading potential. So at the age of 24, he's going to have to really Oh, actually, he's 23. I thought he's 24. Seems like he's been around for ages, to be honest. But yeah, if you give him some decent game time, he should improve. If you ask me, he should be included more than Markovic. So if you consider Chamberlain the backup to Salah and Mane the backup to Coutinho, then that kind of leaves Markovic with no real space in the squad. You know, if we consider him an attacking midfielder, he's not too good with decision making, composure and concentration, which is definitely really needed. I think, you know, you're just gonna have to take a hit on him and just move him on. In truth, 75k wages is already high enough for someone who might not even be a leading player. So you kind of, I feel like you do just kind of have to sell him off. It doesn't make sense to even put him out on loan, in truth. In terms of strikers though, you've got, like we mentioned, Sturridge, Firmino, Ings and Solanke. So you've got 4 when you only need 2. And really, there's only space for Firmino and Sturridge. And Sturridge is considered the leading player. He's susceptible to injuries. He's out for a while, I think, as well. Pulled thigh 5 weeks to 8 weeks, so you don't need to replace him with any sort of lone player. The problem is he's expecting first-team football. He's on incredibly high wages, but he is worth a ton of money. So if you ask me, he's plenty, you know, really good for a backup sort of role in terms of Firmino. Firmino edges him in terms of ability just about. So you've got your 2 strikers sorted, which means you should possibly move on Danny Ings, even though he can become a leading player, possibly. He's susceptible to injuries, no space for him in the squad. It just makes sense to move him on. And that leaves you, of course, with Solanke, who is just a championship player anyway, so you should send him out on loan, and hopefully he'll come back and maybe eventually overtake Sturridge's position, to be honest. You know, if Sturridge becomes, if he's too injury prone for your liking, and maybe his ability might drop off, for example, then maybe you should replace Sturridge with Solanke. But that means you've got a position that needs improvement, and that is the attacking midfield position. You need someone who's a backup to Lallana. Lallana is at his prime year of 29 years of age, but he will start to drop off within about 2 seasons time, possibly. Or even 3, maybe 2 is a bit too early. So you do want to bring in a youngster who's ready for the Premier League and who can eventually overtake Lallana's position. So with the players that we mentioned who you could sell off and, you know, move on loan and all that sort of business, you should have plenty of wage budget available as well as transfer budget. Let's have a quick look there. You've got £75 million. If you ask me, I like to move it into the middle, leaning towards the transfer budget a bit, so you kind of have 56 million, but that's plenty still to bring in a youngster attacking midfielder. And that way you have possibly, according to Football Manager standards at least, you've got one of the top Premier League teams. Plenty of squad depth. The centre-back position, if you ask me, is really the only one that needs some serious improvement, but your starting 11 are great in general. And your backup squad depth is incredible too. You've got leading players. You don't even have youngsters with potential. You've got leading players who are just trying to, you know, itch their way into the first team. So just be careful. I feel like player squad happiness is going to be a bit of an issue with the players who are expecting first team football, not necessarily getting that game time. But yeah, areas of concern might be goalkeeping, which you should keep an eye out on, and the real area that needs improvement is the centre-back position. And that's it. And you have to obviously keep an eye out on your full-backs to see if they actually do improve or not, like the left-back position. But otherwise, you've got a very good, strong squad who should challenge for the title and not really settle just for Champions League football. But getting Champions League football, meeting the board's expectations, and then having a go at the Premier League next year is a very decent shout as well. So that brings us up to our tactics, and obviously we mentioned the formation, but in terms of the way we're trying to play is more of a sort of pass and move type of football, and for that reason we're playing with a control mentality. One of the top teams in the division. Doesn't make sense doesn't make sense to play at countering football or defensive football at all. So we've gone with control. You could possibly try and recreate a tactic where it's like real life, where they play aggressive counter pressing sort of thing, but I just feel like you're one of the top teams, you've got a top squad, no real need to play on countering mentality, and just go ahead with control, take the game to your opponents, and just be careful on the counter attack, which is perfect for, you know, the control mentality. You can definitely up it up to attacking if you ask me, but I like to start on control and then if need be switch to attacking during the game. Structured team shape. I've liked each of my players to do their roles and do it well. I feel like when you play with fluid, your team attacks and defends together, and I'm more of a fan of each player actually fulfilling their roles and just following their roles instructions more so than the team instructions, which is why I have such little instructions. And I feel like that complements the structured team shape and hopefully should keep us more defensively sound. When you play fluid, it kind of does make more sense to put plenty of team instructions because everyone's attacking and defending together, so that kind of all comes together in that sense. And that's why, you know, not too many instructions. I'm not a fan of a lot of them. You can definitely do plenty more, but for our team, we're just going with shorter passing to help with that pass and move type of football. We're playing an offside trap, and we're using tighter marking as well. So in terms of the role, we're trying to play everyone in as much comfort as possible while still suiting the tactic overall, as well as the, you know, team instructions, that sort of business. Just got a regular goalkeeper. We've got 2 wing backs to complement the inside forwards. Coutinho and Salah will be playing as inside forwards on support. You could possibly consider playing Coutinho in the attacking midfield, but that means moving Lallana, and Lallana is only comfortable playing on the right wing, and again that means Salah is out of position and so on and so forth, so it kind of just made sense to play them as is. But yeah, inside forwards with wing backs overlapping them just seem to make the most sense. We need someone who's really willing to get in there in midfield and sort of just win the ball back, and that's why we've got a ball winning midfielder on defend. And in that sense, we're just trying to bring out the best out of Henderson, who's a box-to-box midfielder, and I think the best central midfielder at the club at the moment. So box-to-box, do you really want players who roam a lot, who move around a lot, who don't necessarily cross too often? We want crosses from the byline, and that's where the wing backs come in. You want dribbling players as well, so that helps to have inside forwards, and that's why this sort of tactic suits us. If you ask me, the eventual thing you should work towards, we'll mention that in the end, but for now, box-to-box midfielder brings out the best out of Henderson, and Emre Can I think it is actually, is very comfortable as a ball-winning midfielder. It's not necessarily in terms of the you know, I guess the little circle thing that they have for his ability, but he's very capable in terms of the attributes. Henderson can definitely be a ball-winning midfielder as well, but I feel like he's a box-to-box midfielder naturally, and we want at least one of our central midfielders to be comfortable, so hopefully Henderson can do that as well. But both of these players, you can just about play them in any sort of midfield role, and they should be comfortable in terms of attributes, but in terms of actual comfort, you know, suitability, for example, it says that he's just competent, but I feel like Emre Can will do a very decent job in that role. In terms of the attacking midfield, we just have Lallana as an attacking midfielder. He's a little bit more comfortable in that role than he is as a shadow striker. It really was just between attacking midfielder or shadow striker. He doesn't have the strength, pace or aggression to seriously become a shadow striker, so we're playing him as an attacking midfielder, which suits him a hint more, and it just kind of made sense. His attributes are much better in that position, and we don't get rid of his vision. When you play as a shadow striker, you don't obviously everyone uses their vision, but it's not crucial to the role, so attacking midfield seemed to make the most sense. In terms of the false 9 position for Roberto Firmino, it kind of just made the most sense. He can definitely play in, you know, you have a lot of versatile players in truth, which will come in handy when you know, go through a season. And Firmino as a false 9 seemed to make the most sense. He can definitely play as an attacking midfielder on attack. He's possibly suited best as a shadow striker, but at the moment, Lallana, Firmino, Coutinho and Salah, it seems to be your best front four. Maybe that'll change during the season, and then you can judge based on form and you know, average rating and all that sort of business, but it just kind of made sense to play Firmino as a false 9. He's very capable, suits our tactic as well. The false 9 plays sort of risky passes, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for players who take risks in terms of their passing and their dribbling, and we're looking for players who roam around a lot and who move about a lot, and so the false 9 has a move into channels instruction naturally. But if you ask me in terms of the ability, the only thing, sorry, I forgot to mention is actually the ball playing defender in Lovren. He's very capable in that role. We've got Matip as a central defender. He's a bit more comfortable as a defensive centre back, but he does have the mentals to play as a central defender, and obviously central defender is better at keeping the ball than the defensive centre back, so we've gone with that. Lovren, he's very comfortable as a ball playing defender. Problem is he's suited to playing a stopper a bit more, but we're looking for someone who actually holds the line, because we're playing an offside trap, so we can't move him into the stopper duty at all. But yeah, In terms of mentioning the top tactic that you should be working towards, or the roles rather, to suit the tactic as a whole, I personally like to have the box-to-box midfielder. Sorry, actually, I like to have a roaming playmaker on the left, because they, shoot with their right. If they have a preferred foot right, if not, if they have a preferred foot left, play them here. The point is to play them on opposite flanks, so that way they can actually shoot. So I like to have a roaming playmaker here. The ball-playing defender stays here as well, because he can find the roaming playmaker quite well. I like to have the ball-winning midfielder on defend duty here. That makes a little bit more sense in terms of how the tactic works and that sort of business as a whole. But obviously, we're trying to keep things as much to the player's comfort as possible. But I'm just telling you what you should eventually work towards. Your flanks are perfectly suited. Inside forwards on support and wing backs on attack is exactly what we're looking for. We're not looking for players to really cross too much in terms of the front four. And so that suits us quite well. We want the wing backs to do the crossing. The inside forwards are the ones who should be dribbling, scoring plenty of goals, cutting inside, playing the risky passes, things that natural wingers don't tend to do. So I feel like the flanks are already sorted for you, as well as the defense and the goalkeeper. It's really just the midfield and attack. So this is what I like to play with: ball winning midfielder and roaming playmaker. And then I like to have a shadow striker, because they have better movement in the attacking midfielder, and I feel like they have more of obviously a goal scoring threat. And the good thing is they naturally dribble more, they play more risky passes, they get further forward. I think the attacking midfielder on attack duty has that as well, but more importantly moves into the channels, which is what we need. We need horizontal, I guess, or is it called lateral movement, and so the shadow striker gives that more than the attacking midfielder. In terms of your striker, your best bet, false nine should work decently as well, but the best one is actually a complete forward on support, and the reason is that he has everything of a striker that you would want, and they still suits our tactic in the sense that he dribbles more, he plays the risky passes, and he roams from position. All of these things are very important to a pass and move type of football, so that's eventually what you should work towards. But we showed you the tactic that suits the team, your players, a little bit more. As you can see, people are a lot more uncomfortable with the roles that we set them on now. But yeah, try and eventually move towards those type of roles, but with the setup we already have, you should be doing a decent job at, quite comfortably. So that's kind of it in terms of tactics and team guide. We can go through some things quite generally. Staff can always be improved, of course. You only have the highest average for technical coaching. So, a top team such as yourself should be better in terms of the coaching, but even more worryingly, you should be better in the scouting department as well. So have a quick look at that as well. Training, my personal preferences are to have my team on high and balanced during preseason, and then average and balanced during the season. Match preparation stays on match tactics throughout preseason, but during the season itself, it changes according to what my scouts are telling me. The schedule, you could possibly set up some more competitive or better friendlies, but maybe you can leave it as is for this season, and then next season sort out your own friendlies. Competitions, we already talked about the expectations. Scouting system's been entirely revamped. But you can get yourself acquainted with it quite well if you just, actually attempt to. In terms of the packages, though, you're a top team, so you should have world packages for both your senior and youth packages. At the moment, the youth one's definitely not good enough with you just keeping an eye out on England. Got plenty of money in the transfer budget as well, so you could easily move some of that to the scouting budget without, taking too much away from your transfer budget. And with your Liverpool, you should be having that with ease. You've got 47% world knowledge, so you don't want that to drop at all. Transfers, you've only got one in, which is Naby Keita, I think his name is. I can't remember how to say his name, but either way, he's very comfortable with a roaming playmaker role, and that suits the eventual tactic that you're hoping to work towards. The problem is, what does this mean for your other central midfielders? We already talked about how well stocked you are in there. Your first teamers and your backup central midfielders are all leading players for the Premier League. So do you have a spot for Naby here? It's obviously a very big concern, but it's a concern that you can deal with next season. In terms of the club itself, we already mentioned the recent history. They haven't won the Premier League, I think, in terms of the new format, I think it was. It's, widely popular how poorly Liverpool are doing. But a very interesting challenge. You do want to take over and increase this number, 18 Premier League titles, and you do want to finally win your first Premier League, Barclays Premier League, the new division sort of thing, title, and hopefully the aim for you should be to overtake Manchester United's record titles of 20, I think it is. But yeah, that's the aim, and you should try and do that, and you should try and win your first Premier League title in quite some time. and really just get a dominance over the league again. If you win it 3 times in a row, I always say if you've won a division 3 times in a row, you're officially dominant, and you know, you're unlikely to be going anywhere anytime soon. Champions League trophies to add to would be great. Obviously cup competitions you could do some improvement, but the main thing for you is the Premier League. The board, we mentioned what they kind of expect from you in terms of your staff numbers can definitely improve. You've got a lot of advised numbers that you aren't meeting, and we talked about the transfer budget quite generally. Finances though, 106 million, so maybe you don't want to spend that whole 75 million. But with Premier League money coming in, you should be quite well. Debt and loan, you've obviously got them. I think almost every top team really has it. But for you guys, it's not too bad at all. 420k per month is very doable, and it's only up until 2030. So even though it's 55 million, you're barely, you know, you paying very little of that in one go. The gift loan is a bit of a concern, so hopefully no one takes you, but no one overtakes the club. But you know, you should be okay either way with the money you've got. Sponsors, not really any concern. Projections, balance are improving, and transfer budget, and that's all that really matters. Keep an eye out on total wage costs. I feel like a lot of those Liverpool players on wages that they don't deserve, particularly the backup players, and so that might be a bit of an area of concern, because when you do try and sell them on when you don't need them anymore, no club will be interested in taking them, of course, because the wages are too much. Under 23s and under 18s, players to look out for possibly. We already mentioned players who are close to first team action, but in terms of actual potential, Ben Woodburn seems to be the best player for your team. Origi is going to come back from his loan spell as well as a striker, and he's going to be very interesting. Suits your team, I think. Complete forward on support is exactly what we're working towards. The question is, will he come back from Wolfsburg a better player or not? But yeah, I think everyone up until here, but Woodburn, Origi and Kent are possibly the only players who can become eventual full first teamers. Kent is either footed, so you could possibly retrain him as an inside forward. His decision making needs some work, but he's got decent vision and passing. Finishing might need some work as well, but he does cut inside naturally from the left wing anyways, so it does suit the inside forward position. But yeah, like I always say, you never know who will exceed their potential, so don't, you know, rule any of these players out. They possibly can surpass their potential and become better players than you think. And who knows, maybe Origi and Kent won't actually even fulfill their potential. Even Woodburn, for example, next thing you know, he's just stuck on a championship player level. So, you know, but obviously try and give as much opportunity to all the players there. Yeah, I think that's all for today's episode. So if you did enjoy it, then of course, please do hit the like button and subscribe for more Daily Football Manager 2018 content. And as always, guys, thank you all very much for watching.